It is not often that a sequel is better than part one. When going to a movie, I'm always wary when it comes to sequels, as you immediately want to compare the story to part one and even ask, does this need to exist? My hope in this review, I can help show you why you should read this fantastic sequel. Welcome to the GTP. My name is Scott, and my goals help you find great experiences for yourself and your family. So let's dive in as I share with you why you should read JoJo Bizarre Adventures Part 2, Battle Tendency. So what is the story all about? The story starts out in 1938, before the events of World War II in New York City, as we now are following Jonathan's grandson, Joseph Joestar. At the start of the story, we learn that Mr. Speedwagon has discovered the origins of the mask, and an ancient powerful being merged with a pillar. As you expect, things start going horribly wrong. I mean, what could go wrong diving into an ancient tomb that hasn't been disturbed? Maybe betrayal? Maybe the pillar men start waking up? Maybe Nazis appear? All this to say, this story starts out fairly fast-paced, much more faster than anything from part one of JoJo's. So what do I think about the overall story? This is a great sequel. If you enjoyed part one, you're going to love part two. If you did not enjoy part one, I would still recommend reading part two. I would also recommend not reading part two until you've read part one, as you do have a much deeper understanding and appreciation for the story. I was so excited when I started the book to see that none other than Mr. Speedwagon, our lovely commentator, was alive. And if I didn't read part one, I wouldn't have had that joy when I saw the very beginning that we still can follow a little bit more of Mr. Speedwagon. Within the second chapter, the story starts providing some surprising twists. Chapter 3 does a good job giving a little backstory to not feel lost if you missed reading part one, or you might need a little refresher. And it is bizarre as always. 1 minute they're in an Italian restaurant, all of a sudden there's a fight with the mafia, and then all of a sudden just so happens that somebody appears to give you just a teeny bit more information to help move the plot forward. That person just came out of nowhere. And part 2 still has some cartoonish vibes, but you never feel lost. Soon as something is brought up for the first time, all of a sudden there is commentary on the reason why that's being brought up. And all the fight sequences felt so much more fleshed out and intense compared to part one. And there are many oh snap moments when you're turning the pages that I just don't want to spoil in this review. So what about the main character? The character, Joseph, is a terrific protagonist, not as black and white like his grandfather. Joseph is the kind of character that's ready, fire, aim, meaning running into battle first, and during the battle starts to come up with a plan. And what I appreciate early on is that Joseph can realize he's not the strongest fighter. So instead of it being a story about pure muscle, Joseph has to outmaneuver his opponents during each sequence. The fights are much more interesting as you wonder, how is Joseph going to win each battle, knowing that his opponent is vastly superior to him in almost every way. Instead of playing rock and sock'em robots like part one, Joseph is playing chess, with every move trying to outwit, outlast, and outplay his opponents. Yes, I did give a Survivor reference. At times, Joseph also is a little arrogant, which is funny because there is a section of the story where Joseph shares how he hates people who are arrogant. And at the same time, this is all to be a bit of a mask, and as you peel off the layers of Joseph, you realize at his very core, he has heart. As you watch Joseph grow through the story, you can see he has a lot of heart sprinkled into the entire story. Like his grandfather, he does really care about other people. The main difference is he's willing to do whatever it takes to win, including not fighting fair. If it means blasting the enemy with a Tommy gun before the match even starts, Joseph's going to do it. Joseph's battle style reminded me a bit of Dante in Devil May Cry trickster attitude and style. And when it comes to not fighting fair, I'm gonna actually segue and let's go ahead and let's talk about the villains, as I appreciated the approach the author took when it came to Joseph as the protagonist versus the villains he faced when it came to the idea of fairness. So let's talk about the Pillarmen villains. One interesting flip is in part 1, Jonathan Joestar would not only win the battle, but with honor and fairness, where Dio would do whatever it takes to win. In part 2, the author flips the script, where Joseph will do whatever it takes to win, even though he's the good guy, and the villains will fight with honor and fairness due to their pride of being superior beings. The villains also have some very creative techniques. I would have never come up with the idea myself of a person's fingers each having its own mouth with the veins being like tongues. It was gross, bizarre, and amazing all at the same time. Compared to Dio, the Pillarmen are on a whole nother level. The Pillarmen themselves could take Dio on while they're sleeping and still tear him a new one and destroy him instantly. The issue I have with the Pillarmen when it comes to being a villain is they are not as interesting as the character Dio from part 1. I wish instead of leaving it more of a mystery about the Pillarmen's backstory, it would have been better if we could understand how they came to be the men they were. I would love to fully understand, why do they desire to take over the world besides being superior beings? And Dio may be the weaker villain in a fight, but it is much more interesting as you wonder what makes Dio tick. Where with the Pillarmen, I could didn't have that desire to really understand them as much as I did Dio. And since this is a blind review, meaning I have no knowledge of future stories, I was actually a little shocked and surprised to see that Dio was not in this manga whatsoever. So I was hoping he would return. I mean, he was a really good villain in part 1, so maybe in a future arc they'll bring him back. Some of you might be laughing right now because you know the answer. I don't, but I'm looking forward to, as I read part 3, part 4, and part 5 that it's out now. Eventually, I'm crossing my fingers a little bit that we'll see none other than Dio return. So what about the other characters? Rio Speedwagon is back and ready as ever to give you commentary on what is going on from panel to panel. It might be a little silly, but I have fallen in love with Speedwagon's commentary. It's hilarious at times, states the obvious, and bizarre indeed. We are also introduced to a new character named Caesar Zappel, who is the grandson of Jonathan Joestar's mentor, who I would consider Joseph's rival and best friend in the story. Caesar is driven by the pride of his family lineage. We also have Lisa, who becomes Joseph's mentor. She is a strong female character that does not fit the typical tropes. I also appreciate at the end of volume 2, the author shared a bit of the backstory on how he chose to develop her as a character. And unlike part 1, where I felt the supporting cast that was there was more there just for commentary, I appreciated that the supporting cast when it came to part 2 was much stronger, and you actually felt like they mattered and should be part of the story. So let's go ahead and talk about the power system in part 2 when it comes to the Heyman technique. And the Heyman has kicked it up to a whole new level, as you now have someone using tears from their eyes as a bullet, another person taking a cup to catch the tears from that bullet, shoot it right back at their opponent. You have another character that uses bubbles that end up popping with explosions and hurting their opponents. It was really fun to see how these techniques have expanded, how they changed, and how the Heyman system worked in part 2. And while learning Heyman, I also appreciated the training arc, which was fantastic. The author used some very creative techniques for training that I had not seen since Hunter x Hunter. Of course, this did come out way before that. So what about the artwork with JoJo part 2 compared to part 1? This is one of those manga that I wish could be in color instead of black and white. As you can see from some of the covers, they are now rocking the pink hair, more stylish clothes with some amazing battle sequences. Part 2 is a night and day improvement part 1. The pages, the artwork is simply spectacular. So let's go ahead and talk about the dialogue for part 2. The dialogue is interesting as always. The phrases are entertaining, unique, and odd. The play-by-play commentary is back, but it's not all from Mr. Speedwagon this time. In one panel, you will see an action sequence, and in the next panel, someone will say what just happened. An example is, you see a character one panel fall off the cliff, and then the next panel, you see a side character saying, oh no, look, he fell off a cliff. As if you didn't see in the panel before that the character fell off the cliff, and you still have some of those epic one-liners like, I think I got cavities from all that sweet talking. Or, rotten as a moldy pumpkin in a field that even flies would avoid. I mean, could you imagine if someone told you, you are as rotten as a moldy pumpkin in a field that even flies would avoid? It is hilarious, unique, a little odd, yet intriguing all at the same time. Perhaps you can tuck that one away in your back pocket next time you need to hurl back an insult. So let's talk about some cons in story, as I do have a couple. In a heat of a situation in a battle, a character falls, and it just so happens that on the wall next to him is two axes. Coincidence? I don't think so. And there are some holes in the story where all of a sudden an enemy who just woke after thousands of years of sleeping knew what a brake on a mining cart was and what a stick of dynamite was. It could be he was reading his opponent's mind, but then at the same time, he wasn't able to read his opponent's other thoughts. Maybe it was selective mind reading? And this is a minor spoiler. It does not make sense that an enemy is going to let someone live only so they can become stronger to make the fight more fair. In reality, a villain would kill a person right away, not giving them the satisfactory or chance for a rematch. The villains are so prideful that they would allow a potential threat to live? Really? A superior being shouldn't have time for petty things like that. But at the same time, that is a con for me. The author did flip that script where the villains do have fairness, do have pride, and would have the honor for a better battle, compared to Joseph, who will do whatever it takes to win. So what are some life lessons we can take from part 2? And this is a minor spoiler. If you don't want to be spoiled whatsoever, if you haven't read the story, go ahead and click to the next timestamp. So that out of the way, there is a character that does die in this story. And one thing I did appreciate in this story is that when the character died, one person says, hey, let's keep going. We got to go to the next battle. And the other character says, no, we need to give some time to grieve. And with dealing with loss, it is important to slow down, take a deep breath, and allow yourself to grieve. Whether that's a loss of a loved one or friend, a loss of a job, maybe a loss of a season of life where things were going really good and now things are hard. We need to have those moments of not just moving on too quickly so that we can grieve and allow there to be sadness. It's okay to grieve. It's okay to be sad. It's not okay to remain and stay there for a long time. But it is okay and important for us to have those moments where I can take a deep breath, I can reflect on what happens, I can grieve that loss before moving on. So let's talk about the age rating for part 2. Similar to part 1, part 2 is rated for teens. But I actually would lean towards more older teens for this story. Not only is there violence and some language, but you're also dealing with some more heavier subjects as you're seeing racism, sexual assault. So if you were to have a teen read this, I think that opens up some good conversation to have with them on what is racism, why this is wrong, what we can do about that, how this person is treating this other person, how this assault is wrong. What do we say or do when we witness or experience that ourselves? Those are just some heavier topics that for a younger audience may not be able to wrap their head around. So those are things that I think lean towards being an older audience to have those understandings or be able to have those conversations. So let's go ahead and talk about the GTP rating for JoJo Bizarre Adventures Part 2 Battle Tendency. This is an amazing sequel, and it feels like the author was really breaking out of his shell from part 1 to part 2. You can really feel the weight of grief in the panels and the dialogue compared to part 1. I was near emotional myself at certain parts in the story following the characters. Fantastic story. And I'm pretty good at figuring out parts of the plot of a story while I'm reading, and I was pleasantly surprised that there were a few twists and turns that I did not see coming while reading part 2. This story has good pacing, never a dull moment in the story, nothing ever felt like filler material. Each page and panel fit a unique purpose. Joseph has a unique charm as you watch him navigate each fight that is worth sticking around till the very end. And I love towards the end of the story, as you are building up anticipation for the final battle, that it's not your typical death match that you would have been waiting for, but instead they kick it up to a whole new level of fun, entertaining, fighting, and you almost feel like you're in the audience rallying behind Joseph as you're wanting him to take out his final opponent. So after reading JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 2, not knowing anything about the story besides reading Part 1, I will be giving this a GTP rating of an 8 out of 10. In the comments below, would you mind sharing with me your thoughts of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 2? And would you also let me know, would you like to see a review of Part 3? I do take your comments seriously, and I'm currently reading a manga based off of your recommendations on what you'd like me to review next. If you'd like to see more content like this and you've not done so already, would you like, comment, and subscribe to the channel? That helps others know about this thriving community that we are building together. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.